Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Galina Chernik, the Harrison Public Library Director. Welcome to our library fourth annual authors event. We have a very busy agenda today. You can stay for one of the sessions or join us for the whole day. Join us for the whole day. We will kick off our event with the extraordinary author, Ronald Balson. The panel of historical fiction will follow up at 11:30. At 12:45, we will meet nonfiction writers. Our talented reference librarian, Jovi O'Grady, will be chatting with you about new books at 1:30. If you are into contemporary fiction and mystery, join us at 2 p.m. Madeleine Miller, the author of the beloved and best-selling novel Circe, will appear at 3 p.m. I would like to acknowledge the dedication and hard work of our talented event committee, without whom this festivity would not be possible, especially our programming librarian, Giovanna Iannacci. Signed copies of authors' books are available from the Village Bookstore in Pleasantville, New York. Please order online or buy from the store. We'll put link in the chat. And please buy from local stores, not from Amazon this time. Please remain muted during the talks. Questions and answer will take place after each author has spoken. The event survey will be emailed to all attendees. All completed surveys will be entered for a chance to win one of 225 gift cards from the Village Bookstore. The program will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel next week. Books and reading bring out excitement in all of us. This is the beauty of books. They are not just for reading, they are for sharing. With your support and enthusiasm, many new friends and new books will be found today. Now, I would like to welcome my colleague and fellow book lover, Bob Huster, who will introduce our first speaker.
Hi, it's such an honor to welcome Ron Balson. He's the author of Once We Were Brothers, which is fabulous. I read it recently. Saving Sophie, Karolina's Twins, The Trust, The Girl from Berlin, Eli's Promise, and his most recent novel, Defending Britta Stein, which I just finished and I loved. Ron has been the recipient of several honors. The Girl from Berlin was awarded the 2018 National Jewish Book Award for Fiction. He's also the 2019 Adult Fiction Selection of the Illinois Reading Council's statewide program, Illinois Reads. Eli's Promise was selected by the New York Times as new and noteworthy. Ron was a finalist for the Harper Lee Award for Legal Fiction and a runner-up in the Italian, I'm not sure if I can pronounce this correctly, Premio Selezione Bansarella Award for Italian Literature. Ron has appeared on numerous TV and radio shows and has been a featured lecturer nationally and internationally on writing. Without further ado, here's Ron.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to the Harrison Library for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here and to speak with all of you this morning and talk to you about my writing and how I got started, how I go about writing, and then my latest book, Defending Britta Stein. I have been a lawyer, practicing lawyer, a litigator, for, well, I'm starting my 50th year now here in Chicago. And you know, lawyers write. That's what they do. They write briefs, they write appeals, they write arguments, and they write stories. And I think for most of those 50 years, I wanted to be able to write creatively, fiction, you know, not necessarily be prisoned between the confines of the law case and the facts that are attributable to that case. But I wanted the freedom of writing about created characters and created situations. But I never really got around to that until about 15 years ago. And I can say that, well, practicing law takes a lot of time, and it does. I raised, my wife and I, brought up 8 children.
Wow.
And, yeah. And that takes a lot of time, you know, coaching softball and that sort of thing. But I really think that I didn't start writing creatively fiction until one of my legal cases took me to Poland. I had never been to Poland before, and Poland is a fascinating country with fascinating history. But I've always been very interested in 20th century history. I majored in it in college and in World War II. And going to Poland, I went there not as a tourist, not as somebody to really dive into the history of Poland or whatever, but I went there to work. I went there to take depositions and to review documents and interview government officials, and I was there for several weeks. But you can't help going to a place like Poland and being influenced by what is there right in front of your face. Everywhere you look, there are just monuments and mementos and statues and that bring to light what happened to Poland when they were occupied and conquered by the Nazis. I remember one night walking from a restaurant, walking back to the hotel, and just thinking about what questions I'm going to ask tomorrow at a deposition. And there on a brick wall in a nice part of town, there are holes in the wall and a plaque that said, here in 1942, the Nazis executed 22 people. And I'll never forget that. I just stopped and stood there and looked at that plaque and just tried to understand exactly where I was. I was standing in a country that was totally devastated in a war. Nothing in the United States, nothing in my upbringing is like that. I mean, there's a huge, down the block, there's a huge statue of a bunch of soldiers with rifles trying to defend a building in front of the government building, and that's a tribute to the 1944 Polish fight against the Nazis and the uprising of 44. And I again just stood there looking at it. It's so powerful. And I decided then, and this is about 15 years ago, that if I'm ever going to write creatively, if I'm ever going to write a novel, this is something I can get my arms around. This is something I can get passionate about. And so I did. I wrote a story about an ordinary family, one that I could relate to, one like yours and mine, with the same type of moral structure with children, and that you want to succeed. You have a business, you have a community, you know right from wrong. And what would have happened to this Polish family in 1939 and 1940 when the Nazis occupied their country, took over, and started sending Jewish families to the concentration camps. And so that I worked on that book for 3 years, and that book became Once We Were Brothers. And that's a story about an ordinary Polish family in the town of Zamość, Poland. And they have a daughter and a son. And one day a man shows up at the door of the house with a child that he can't raise, and he knows of the family, and he begs the family to take him in. So they raise these 2 boys as though they were brothers. But when the Nazis occupy the land, the new child who is not Jewish joins the Nazis, joins the German army, and betrays the family. And then 70 years later, they meet up in Chicago and confront each other. That generally speaking is the theme of Once We Were Brothers. And that book, when I finished it, it was kind of naive on my part. I just hear I have a manuscript. What am I going to do with this? How do I get this into the bookstores? And you look for agents, literary agents, to represent you to the publishing companies. But in this case, I didn't even have a literary agent, and so I sent letters out, I sent chapters out, summaries, and finally I got an agent to help me, but she couldn't find a publisher to take the book on. So I said, well, what the heck? I'm a lawyer. I'll form my own publishing company, and I did, and published the book myself. So it was a self-published book, Once We Were Brothers, and it did awfully well for whatever reason, and I know the reason. Of course, it's word of mouth. Books succeed by word of mouth, and if you ask yourself the last time you read a book, it's because someone recommended it to you, or you recommended a book to a friend of yours. You said, "Oh, I read this book. I enjoyed it. You would like it," and that is that's how books sell. And Once We Were Brothers did very well. And after about, a year, after we had sold quite a number of books, it was picked up by a major publishing company and I've been with them ever since. Anyway, they were happy with my book. It did well, and and I was ready to write another book. And so then I wrote Saving Sophie. While I was in the middle of writing Saving Sophie, and going on book tours like this one, talking to people, only we did it in person and not on Zoom. While I was doing that, and when you talk about books about the Holocaust, books about World War II, and especially 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there were many survivors and families of survivors who would come to listen to you. And sometimes at the end of a talk, they'd come up and they'd say, well, I was a prisoner in the Auschwitz camp. I was a prisoner in the Buchenwald camp, and tell you a story or two about themselves, even though many times they wouldn't talk about it to their own families. But while I'm working on this, a woman comes up to me and she says, I read Once We Were Brothers, and I thought you were writing about my family. You got it just right. And so we talked for a little while, and then we went out to lunch. And this woman was remarkable. She was a very strong, powerful woman, 90 years old. But she told me the story of her family, which was an incredible story. They were in the Polish town of Szanów, and her father was actually a captain in the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I. He fought with the Germans side by side, but when the Nazis occupied the town of Szanów, he wasn't a captain to them. He was just a Jew, and they came to the house to arrest him and the other members of the family, and they took the daughter, Faye, put her up in the attic and told her to stay there. And she was just a young teen, and they were arrested, and she never saw him again. And this is the true story that this woman is telling me, how she then stayed up in the attic for a few weeks and finally made her way out to a farm where she lived for a while. Then she went looking for her parents, got arrested, sent to concentration camp, then another slave labor camp, until finally she was sent to Auschwitz. And on the Auschwitz death march in January 1944, in the middle of the cold, when they were marching the prisoners deep into Germany, she escaped. It was an incredible story. And then she told me about these two little babies, and that's the most incredible story at all. And I don't want to tell you about that in case that would ruin it for you. That would ruin the plot. Anyway, so that story, I wrote with this woman, and with her notes and with her memories, and that story then became Karolina's Twins. I got away from the Holocaust and wrote a story about Northern Ireland. That was The Trust. Of course, all my books are historical fiction. And that was a story in Northern Ireland in battles in Belfast between the Protestants and the Catholics. That they called that the Troubles. That there was some 13-year war between, and really a war on the streets between the Catholics and the Protestants. And so I wrote a story about a family and what they endured through those troubles. When I write historical fiction, one, because I love history and I love to bring out the events and the era and whatever I'm interested in. But I think a lot of times, truth be told, it's cheating because the background, the backstory, what happened during that period of time, the amazing characters that happened during that period of time, whether they were leaders in Northern Ireland, or whether they were Nazi generals or Hitler himself or Himmler or what, they existed. That story is written by history. And so all I have to do as a fiction writer is to create characters, make up characters, and make up a story, and then kind of weave that into the historical basis that exists. And really, that's the story of a historical fiction writer. That's what we do. Anyway, after The Trust, I wrote a story about, which interested me. Before the Nazi Party took over in Germany in 1933, there was a period they called the Weimar Republic in Germany. And it was that period in the late 20s and early 30s. It was a period of an explosion of culture. They called it the Weimar culture, an explosion of science, art, music, literature. The most famous people, Einstein and unbelievable musicians, and so that interested me in the transition. If you were a wonderful artist, like a musician, what would have been your experiences from the late 20s and early 30s into Nazification, into the Third Reich? And so I wrote a story about a young Jewish girl who was an exceptional pianist, who played with the Berlin Philharmonic. And what happened to her during the Nazi realm? What happened to her, and what happened to her father, who played for the Philharmonic, and what happened to those people? And it's a story, but it's a story about people. I hope. See, the other thing about writing historical fiction, which is very gratifying, I think, to an author and to a reader, you might read about the history of an era or an event or something like that. And it's a history book. And if you're interested in it, you may remember it, but I believe that if in historical fiction, if I can create characters that you can identify with, that you care about, that you root for, and you identify with that character as they experience what actually happened during that period of time, then you can experience it too in a kind of detached way, but in a more personal way, and it will become more important to you, and you'll remember it better, and it'll mean more to you. And so that's hopefully in The Girl from Berlin, Ada Baumgarten, a young girl who's a pianist. If you can identify with her and her family, care about them, you can get a feel for what happened to professionals during that period of time. After The Girl from Berlin, I went back to writing a story about a family in a Polish city, and that became Eli's Promise. Eli's Promise is a story of Eli Rosen and his family, and their migration from a Polish city to a post-war camp, then immigrated to a city in America, which is that. So it really followed the migration of a Jewish family from deep in Poland into America. My latest book, Defending Britta Stein, is about Denmark. I really didn't know that much about Denmark, and people tell me, they read the book and they say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't really know that much about Denmark. And Denmark was an extraordinary story, a unique story. The Danish people, what they did during World War II was just an extraordinary story. They had what they called the Danish Unity. It was a society that cared about their people, and whether they were Jewish or Lutheran or Catholic, they cared about them. There was no religious discrimination. And then when the Nazis occupied Denmark, and they occupied Denmark under what they called a cooperation agreement. In other words, Hitler really was fond of Denmark. He thought they were his little Aryan brothers, and he didn't want to conquer and destroy Denmark. So he made an agreement with them, although it was at the point of a gun. He made an agreement where Denmark could maintain its internal sovereignty and run its country as it saw fit, and even deal with its Jews the way it saw fit. But externally, it could not form alliances with any other party. He changed his mind in 1943, and he ordered the deportation of all the Jews in Denmark. But the Danish people, and it was a secret, he was going to take them all the night of a Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah, and he was going to then put them into ships and send them off to concentration camps. And the Danish people got wind of this. The secret leaked out, and and there was a small Jewish community, only 7,600. When the secret leaked out, the Danish people, as one, as unified, hid all the Jews. They hid them in their homes. They hid them in hospitals. They hid them in stores. And then in the middle of the night, they snuck them across.
Ron,
Yeah.
Ron,
Am I running out of time?
well, yeah, you got 3 more minutes, but I was just going to add, that's one of the things that's so fascinating about your books. You learn so much history. I used to have a boss who was Danish, Niels, boy, and then, he actually went back to Denmark, but it would have been really fun to have talked to him about this while I was reading your last book. But I just wanted to throw that in there, and you've got about 3 minutes left.
Well, I'm sorry if I went too long.
No, it's fascinating. Fascinating.
I'm just a wordy guy.
Yeah.
But just wanted to tell you about my writing career and whatnot. Anyway, out of the 7,600 Jews, they saved all but 400, which is an incredible thing. And most people don't know about that. And I think and I have characters that you can identify with in that story and kind of personally experience what happened through that period of time. Anyway, that's fine. And I'll take questions now, Bob.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you like.
Bob, there's a question in the chat box.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Here's a question, Ron. When you first started writing, were any how-to resources useful to you? For example, books or articles about story structure, creating characters, or writing description?
I can't say that I used any specific sources that instructed me how to write creatively, how to write fiction, how to make characters. I just I suppose that came to me. I had been writing. You have to realize I have been writing legal documents for 40 years, for almost 40 years before I started writing. And there's really, you can say, okay, well, those are legal briefs. That's nothing to do with the fiction, but you're wrong. I spoke 2 years ago at the American Academy of Appellate Lawyers. It was their annual meeting here in Chicago, and I spoke to them, and the topic of my address was storytelling. They wanted me to talk about storytelling because 1, I'm a lawyer, and 2, I write fiction, and they're the same in elements, in the same construction. You still need to grab the attention of your reader or your judge and persuade them and be authentic. And so really, I've been writing for a long time.
We have 2 other questions, Ron, that I'd like to ask myself, but it's basically the same question. Someone asked, who are your favorite authors? And someone else asked, what authors do you admire? And did they influence you in any way?
I think I get that question a lot. Different writers influence me in different ways. As to historical fiction, Herman Wouk, Leon Uris, those are my idols. I mean, they wrote terrifically about World War II and did such a wonderful job. When it comes to the use of language and descriptions, and I'm a big fan of Joan Didion. When it talks, when it's just telling the ins and outs of what happened in a situation. I'm a big fan of Eileen McNamara, who wrote a wonderful book about Eugene Kennedy and Eunice Kennedy. And so, I mean, different authors influence me in different ways.
Fascinating. This has been fascinating. So much fun. I think our time is about up. Our next session is going to continue with historical fiction. And thank you so much, Ron. This was so interesting. It's not every day you get to hear a fabulous author like this. Thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate being here and being with all of you this morning.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
It was-
Ron.
Berlin was one of the best books I've ever read, Ron. Thank you so very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very
Fascinating.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.